Don't ever stand between a politician and a camera. I'm glad to be here with you guys. Thank you for inviting me here. And so this is my first speech since I spoke last week after Clint Eastwood. And he was supposed to be here. I don't know where he is. No, I'm pretty excited. Great to be home. Thank you guys. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks to Sammy. Where'd you go? You're here, right? Yeah, there he is. Thank you for hosting us here today. Thank you guys so much. And the food looks great, by the way, so maybe I'll get a to-go box. So here's what I thought I'd do today, is just kind of talk about where the country is, from my point of view, from Washington, and then answer any questions that you have. And I'll just tell you right up front, if you came here in search of either a partisan speech to be upset about or a partisan speech to be excited about, that was last week. This week, what I really want to talk to you about is kind of my view of what I've learned in the year and a half I've been in the U.S. Senate about our country and its future. And I'll lay out for you kind of the different opinions about how to address it. But there's not really a lot of debate about what the challenges we face are. And they're really multifaceted from an economic perspective. This is largely a business group of folks that are involved in small business, so far be it from me, a political figure, to be lecturing you about small business, and so I'm interested in hearing from you about it. But certainly the challenges we face are real, and they impact you, and I want to just tell you from a federal perspective how I view those issues in the year and a half I've been there, and then I'm interested in getting any input that you might have about it. The fundamental problem we face in the country is that the economy just isn't growing fast enough. And that obviously manifests itself in economic terms. You heard President Clinton last night talk about GDP, and what that means basically is gross domestic product. How big is your economy? Your economy has to grow fast in order for it to create the jobs, not just the jobs, but to create the kind of jobs that you need in order to provide prosperity for people. Last week at the convention, I shared the story of my parents. My dad was a bartender, and my mom was a stock clerk at Kmart, and a maid, and a cashier. But the reality is that in the 21st century, someone doing those jobs would struggle to provide for their children what my parents were able to provide for us in the 20th century with those jobs. That's not anyone's fault. It's not the Republicans' fault or the Democrats' fault. That's the 21st century. And so that's really the part of the economic downturn that I want to focus on with you for a moment. We all know we had a housing crisis. We all know banks made loans that were never going to get paid back. We all know that for some of us like me who bought houses in 2005 and 2006, we paid more for our house than it may ever be worth. We understand that. And there's nothing we can do about that at this point other than to try to figure out ways to help people get out from underneath it. But what I want to focus on is the more structural problems that we face from an economic perspective. Because that's really where the crux of the problem lies. The crux of the problem is the 21st century is just a very different time than any other time we've ever lived. There used to be a time where you can graduate from high school, go work for a company, be there for 30 years or 40 years and retire with a pension. That may still be possible here and there, but those days are probably gone, maybe forever. That kind of economy is just not going to be around in the 21st century. The reason is because the business that you enter may not even exist 30 years from now. Not because the business did something wrong, but because the industry they were involved in doesn't exist anymore. That's how fast the pace of change has become. Just think about the things that were around 10 years ago that aren't even around now. They're just not around anymore. I mean, just the other day, remember that these are real world examples, they're probably not the greatest, but I recently published a book. We used to have multiple bookstores. I think now we're down to one major national chain. Why? Is it because people read less? Is it because Borders did something wrong? No. It's because today you can buy those books from Amazon, and you can share it with people. You can buy multiple copies of it and share it with people, which as an author is not a good thing. But more importantly, the point being is that the industry has changed. And so if you invested your whole life in owning and running a major chain of bookstores, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just the industry changed overnight from right underneath your feet. That's just the reality. So this is the fundamental reality of the 21st century, is that the economy and entire industries are being recreated faster than they've ever been. But the fundamentals of economic growth have never changed. They involve, first of all, people with money or access to money. You have to have someone who has access to money, whether they borrow it, they made it and saved it, somebody invested it with them. You have to have access to money in order to be able to do step two, which is open up that business. Take an idea you have and turn it into a business or a venture of some sort. And so when you look at the fundamentals of moving forward into the 21st century, what are the impediments to that happening today? Well, part of the impediments is the access to the money. right? From the banking perspective, it's not as easy to walk into a bank anymore and say, I'd like to take out a small business loan. Number one, because community banks are under tremendous duress. I don't know if there are any community bankers here today, but community banking has become much more difficult than it was just a few years ago. And it's a function of a lot of different things, but a lot of it has to do with banking regulations, designed to deal with some of the abuses that happened a few years ago, but bankers will tell you that it's made it harder for them to lend. That's just the reality of how it's playing out. Part of it is that the money's not around like it used to be. People are afraid and they're not as encouraged to invest as they once were. What gives someone incentive to invest in the future is very simple. They think they can make their money back with a profit. That's the reason why if you invest money without expecting anything back, there's nothing wrong with that. It's called charity. You should do it. But if you invest money into something hoping to make money back, that's called business. And so one of the things that makes money available for investment is that people think, if I invest this money, I'm going to make this money back in the future, and I'm going to make it back with a healthy enough profit to encourage me to do that, as opposed to leaving it in the bank and living off the interest. So we have to incentivize that. We have to create, what government can do is create incentives for people to do that. Create an incentive for people that have that money to use that money in that way. And the first thing you do in order to give people the incentive to do that is you create predictability. And that says they know what the rules are going to be 5 years from now, they know what the rules are going to be 15 years from now. They understand what the rules are. They're not arbitrary, they're not going to be made up on the run, they're not going to be changed every year. Because in order for you to plan a business, you have to know these are what the rules are going to be. And so I know whether I'm going to have a chance to succeed or fail based on knowing what the rules are. The second thing is there has to be availability of the money. The money has to be there. If in fact the money is being siphoned off into paying a tax rate higher than they can afford, or if the money is being siphoned off to fund government debt, the money is not available for investment. And the third thing that they need to believe is that they have a reasonable chance to make a return on that investment in the future, which is where the national debt really hurts us. Because when someone looks at a country with a $16 trillion debt, it's not just a moral obligation to pay it back, it has a real world economic impact. I've had people ask me in the last 2 weeks, well, what does that mean to me from a jobs perspective? I understand we owe $16 trillion, that's not a good thing. I understand we owe half of it to foreigners, that's not a secure thing. But how does that hurt my ability to find a job? Here's how. Because, number one, that money came from somewhere. Money has to come from somewhere. That money that the government is borrowing, they're taking it from somebody. And one way or the other, they're selling government debt that people are investing in the government instead of in the private sector. So number one, that's just a dollar. Every dollar the government borrows is a dollar that's not available for private investment. But the second problem with it is that investors look at that and realize, okay, a government that owes $16 trillion with no plan to pay it back is a government that's destined for really high tax rates in the future, which is when we expect to make our money back on the money we're investing. So I'm not sure if I want to invest money in a country that in the future, when I'm going to be making my money back on the money I'm investing now, I'm going to have to pay a really high tax rate on it. So that's how the debt is hurting investment. The other thing that's holding us back is the regulatory code. Now look, I'm not an anti-government guy. I'm not. If you came here today to hear me bash government and tell you, I'm not, the government has a role to play. You want your air to be clean, you want your water to be drinkable, you want your medicine to be what it says on the label. You know, you want your food to really be what it says on the package. You know, you get out in the street, you want to make sure people are stopping at the red light and the green and going on the green light. Government has a role to play. The problem is that all regulations come with a price. There's a price of compliance with those regulations. And one of the problems we have today at every level of government, under both Republicans and Democrats, is that sometimes the regulations don't undergo a cost-benefit analysis. That when they look at the regulations, they look at all the good things they think the regulations would do, but they're not looking at the impact the regulations would have on the people being regulated. And there is a cost to compliance. By the way, there's also a cost to compliance with the tax code. It's not just how much you pay in your tax rate. It's how hard is it to actually legally comply with it. How difficult is it to figure it out? And that's problematic because it costs money to figure it out. So the high tax rate and the complicated tax code and complicated regulations will hold back investment because people are insecure about figuring those rules out and what they're going to be in the future. But here's where they really hurt. They don't hurt the big businesses. At the end of the day, a major mega corporation or a multi-billionaire may not like complicated taxes and complicated regulations, but they can afford to figure it out. They will hire the best lobbyists and the best lawyers in the world to navigate it, And if they really don't like the rules or regulations, they will hire the best lobbyists in Washington or Tallahassee to change them. The people who get crushed by this are small businesses that cannot afford to hire a law firm to navigate themselves through the 15 permits they have to pull. That cannot hire the best tax counsel in town to figure out what the tax code is going to look like if they do A versus B. So that has a distressing effect on economic growth as well. So from a government perspective, it's the runaway, it's the lack of control on reasonableness and regulations, the lack of a cost-benefit analysis on regulations, the unpredictability of the cost of the tax code in the future, the worry about the tax rate in the future. All these things are hurting investment in our economy right now. Those are facts. I mean, that's what's going on today in terms of governmental policy. But there are other things that are standing in the way as well. The other things that are standing in the way, one is our energy policy. The United States of America has got to figure out a sustainable pro-American energy policy. Not just energy politics, but energy policy. Here's what we do know. We are an extremely energy-rich country. Just in the last few years, the American innovators have figured out a way to get access to deposits of natural gas and oil that we never thought we'd have been able to get to in the past. Because we figured out a way to drill, not just vertically, but horizontally. We figured out a way to do this fracking and hydraulic fracturing. In essence, we have these entire deposits of oil and natural gas that we didn't think we could get to a few years ago, that now we can, particularly in natural gas. To the point where the U.S., in conjunction with Brazil, Mexico, hopefully, Venezuela, if it moves in the right direction, Colombia and some other countries, there is a real possibility for the Western Hemisphere to, at a minimum, compete with, if not displace, the Middle East as a global source for global energy. That creates an industry. If you don't believe me, take a short trip to North Dakota. You will find unemployment at 2-point-something%. You will find that they are importing people to work in the service industry there, because these advances in energy have created an industry that comes with it. A huge industry is built around accessing and exporting energy resources. But here's the other thing that lowering energy costs would do to the United States. It would make manufacturing more cost-effective again. One of the leading cost drivers in manufacturing, in addition to, by the way, environmental costs and regulatory costs, is energy costs. Some manufacturing is extremely energy dependent. And so all of that has to be passed through to the end user, all of it, every penny of it. The higher your electric bill at your business, the higher you have to charge people for food or services. Because you've got a business that can't pass through their costs can't stay in business. The same is true for manufacturing. One of the things that makes us uncompetitive with other countries is the cost of energy. And so if you were able to bring energy costs and supply under control, it would make manufacturing, once again, more competitive in the United States, a source of economic growth and a source of jobs. The last point I would make, and probably the one that I should have started with, but the one I end with because it's not really necessarily a federal policy, and yet it's one that federal policymakers need to talk about, is a cliche for everyone, that's education. But here's why that matters. There is an enormous number of jobs out there in America that are not being filled, and there are a enormous number of people looking for jobs that can't find one. The disconnect is that too many of our people don't have the skills to fill the jobs that are available. There are no jobs in the 21st century, really, if you don't have skills. The days of being able to drop out of high school and find a job with which you can feed your family are gone. The truth is that unless you have some sort of skill set, it doesn't have to be a 4-year degree at a university, it doesn't have to be a master's degree, although those are all great things to have. But unless you have some sort of post-high school capacitation and skill set, you are going to struggle to find employment in this country. The statistics are remarkable. It is, statistically speaking, I don't have the exact number with me, but let me say this, I'm very comfortable in saying this to you. The statistics show that if you do 3 things in this country, 3 things, the chances of you being poor are virtually non-existent. 3 things. Number 1 is you don't drop out of high school. Number 2 is you get some sort of post-high school education. And number 3 is you don't have children until you're married. Those 3 factors, if you do those 3 things, your chances of being poor in the U.S. is virtually. So, look, I'm just telling you the statistics. I'm not passing judgment on what people need to do with their lives, but I'm telling you, if you do those three things, the chances of being poor in the U.S. are virtually nil. That doesn't mean you're going to be rich, by the way. It doesn't mean you're going to, but the chances of not finding some level of prosperity become non-existent. What that tells us is that there really is no employment in the 21st century that you can raise a family with that doesn't involve some sort of educational attainment. And so the two things that we're trying to develop here from a policy perspective is what can government do to make that more accessible? And look, it's not just about, these are all good things, but it's not just about spending more money into education. It's about creating more access to it as well. For example, the cost of college and universities is exorbitant and continues to rise. It's time to relook at all the programs that we use to pay for college education. When I finished my 7 years of school after high school, I owed in excess of $100,000 in student loans. You saw the First Lady the other night say that at one point they were paying more in their loans than in their mortgages. That was me too. That's just not a sustainable thing. It isn't. There are just a lot of people that are not able to finish school or go to school or pursue school because the cost of education has outstripped their ability to pay for it. Some schools have gotten so expensive you can't even work your way through school even if you wanted to. So we've got to figure out a way to look at the problems that we face today with the cost of education. Number one, in the way we pay for it. Secondly, in the way we deliver it. The second point that I would make, and there's real advances already happening in this, is the way that education is being delivered today should be streamlined through the highest and best use of technology. The truth is there's a tremendous amount of skill set that can be transferred across internet platforms, distance learning platforms that were unavailable just a few years ago. Now some classes you're going to have to go into a classroom and take. But there's a lot of learning that can happen today through virtual processes that are still not being fully developed and being fully implemented. They're cost effective. In essence, the schools don't have to pass through the cost of the air conditioning and the building and all of that. And yet people can take a lot of courses that will make that more cost effective. These are strategies that work. Here's the third. For the life of me, I do not understand why we have stigmatized career education. Why we have told kids that unless they go to a four-year university, they're not successful. There's no reason why we can't graduate kids from high school that are also industry certified in a trade. We know how to do this stuff. And I know that some of it's already happening here in this county, where kids are graduating certified as a BMW technician, where at 18 years of age, they start out making $38,000 a year. Now, you're not rich at $38,000 a year, but for an 18-year-old, that's not a bad deal to start with. And you can quickly rise from there. Why we have stigmatized career education. And the fact is that what happens oftentimes is there are young people that are going to school, and they're like, look, this is what I like fixing stuff with my hands. I like doing mechanic work. I want to fix airplane engines. But my high school doesn't teach that, so I'll just drop out. And what happens, and you know what happens, kids, when their dreams and their hopes for themselves do not overlap with what they're being taught or what they're doing in school, they drop out. We lose them for 10 years. And then they finally try to re-enter 10 years later through some trade school or one of these private universities or some sort of learning program. But it's just harder to deliver that at 27 than at 17. Things change over those 10 years. By the way, that's the other thing we have to be better at, is retraining folks. And I've seen that in my own life. My sister didn't finish school, and she, for 15 years, just kind of worked at different jobs that she could get her hands on, went back to school and got her degree, and today is an assistant principal. But that was able to happen despite some significant obstacles because of a lot of family support. But for many people, that's very difficult to do. If you're 31 years old raising 3 kids, it's not easy to all of a sudden work full-time, raise those kids, especially if you're a single mother, and go back to school and get a degree. That's where distance learning can become helpful, but we've got to figure out innovative ways to retrain people as well. Here's another reason why you're going to have to be retrained. Sometimes you'll work at a company that 10 years from now the industry just won't exist anymore. I mean, imagine if you worked at a place that built video cassettes. That would be, 15 years ago you probably did very well. Today you're probably not going to find a job because everything's being downloaded electronically. So my point is those things are going to happen, and they're going to happen faster than they've ever happened before. So we've got to have a platform in place to be able to retrain people and quickly get them back on their feet and retrain into a skill. That's going to involve greater coordination between the givers of education, who are offering courses that is what the economy is demanding from its workforce. In essence, business says we need more of this. We need more people that can do these things. Your education system has to be able to quickly respond to that and produce people that do more of this. And the way we pay for education has to be able to respond for that as well. There has to be some level of overlap so that quickly, in a fast-growing economy, if all of a sudden we have a shortage of whatever, that our education system can quickly retrain people or produce workforce to meet that job need. We don't have 15 years to make that shift anymore. You have to be able to make those in a year and a half now. That's how fast this economy will develop. And as much as any of the other issues I've mentioned, that one goes to the heart of what's holding back some of our economic growth. Now, those are the bad things. Here's the good things that are happening. The American worker is still more productive than any worker in the world. It's actually not even close. You have to hire, many of these countries that mass produce things, you have to hire 2 to 2.5 people. I don't know how you hire 2.5 people, but that's the statistic. Sometimes it takes as many 2.5 to 3 people in some of these foreign factories to do the work that one American can do. So that's a good thing we have on our side. Here's the other thing we have on our side, a tremendous collection of dreamers, of everyday people that have not run out of good ideas, of people that every single day you'll find them at a Starbucks or a Panera or just sitting in the back corner somewhere drawing up some great idea on the back of a napkin. All they need is a few bucks to open up that business and make it work. We still have a lot of that going on. We still have plenty of people that want to stop being an employee and start being an employer. We still have plenty of people that are entrepreneurial and want to go out and open a business. We haven't lost any of that. The raw elements of growth and prosperity are all still in place. But what we do need is some changes in governmental policies that capacitate that and respond to that in the 21st century faster than we ever have. And that's a tremendous challenge because our republic just doesn't work that way. Our republic is not designed for quick policy shifts. It's designed for long and brutal debates which lead to some level of compromise somewhere in the middle that take many, many years and many, many months in order to get there. I wouldn't trade our freedoms for efficiency, but it's a challenge. We have to recognize that. We have to put in place, one of the great challenges we have now is these desires to regulate technology and to regulate the internet and things of that nature. There's no, by the time you've regulated it, it's moved on to be something else. There's no way in the world that we could possibly regulate some of these industries that move so quickly, so fast. And so that becomes a challenge in the 21st century as well. I'm optimistic about the future. I ultimately believe we'll get all of these things right. I just do. And I have reason to believe that because we have in the past. And I have reason to believe that in the future because I know our people. There's nothing wrong with the American people. Now, there are some issues going on in American society that have to be confronted. But those are things you're going to confront in your role as a father and a mother, as a neighbor, as a member of a church group or a member of a community group. Not a politician. No politician is going to come and raise kids in this country. No politician is going to run and raise families in this country. We have the most important role we're ever going to have is that role outside of government. Government's an important institution, and it has an important job to do. But we do have some societal issues that we as Americans, we as neighbors, we as friends, we as parents and grandparents have to confront. We need to be honest about those and confront them. But from a government perspective, what government can do is to create the conditions for success, particularly in the things government is supposed to be doing. Whether it's capacitating our people, or our infrastructure, or in our tax and regulatory policy. If we do just a handful of things right, the 21st century has every reason to be an American century as well. I know that this is a cliche, but if you stop and think about it, you would agree. There is not a nation on earth that I would trade places with despite our problems. There isn't. I wouldn't rather be China. Look, they've got some exciting things going on in China in terms of growth, but they also have an enormous millions of people that live in tremendous poverty still. The income inequality in China is extraordinary. There's deeper problems. In China, if you don't live in a city, you don't go to school. If you're born with a disability or any sort of 2 strikes against you from the circumstances of your birth, you're only going to go so far. Much of your life is decided by who your parents were. If you're born into difficult circumstances, not just China, but much of the world doesn't even try. I wouldn't trade that for this. I wouldn't trade their freedoms either. In China, if you enter the wrong internet search, you're going to have a knock on the door asking you what you were thinking. I wouldn't trade that for what we have here. And so my point, and the last thing I would say is, look, anybody who watches American politics over the last 2 weeks, the convention last week, and then the convention this week, and you're watching from afar or even from here, you ask yourself, how can these people share a country? How can such different views live in one place? And I would just say to you, yeah, we are a unique people, the American people. We're unique. There's no doubt about it. We can be quarrelsome. because we have tremendous freedoms. We come from tremendous diversity, different backgrounds and different experiences, different parts of the world. And so sometimes we've reached some very different conclusions. Add to that, we have extraordinary freedoms to express those differences of opinion. And Americans are not shy about expressing their differences of opinion in virtually any forum they're given access to. But I'll also tell you that there's no more compassionate people in the world. Maybe it's because we're all just a generation removed from someone who lived a very different life. Maybe because no matter who you are, you're but one or two generations removed from tragedy or poverty or struggles. And so I think that as a people unites us and makes us sensitive to the plight of others. Time and again, when the world's been in need, and even no one's responded greater than America, for as generous as the American taxpayer is with the rest of the world. Now, there are 4 million people alive today in Africa because you, the American taxpayer, are paying for their antiviral medication to keep them alive with AIDS. That's a fact. Millions of people around the world today will eat a meal because the American taxpayer, through our foreign aid programs, will pay for it. But as generous as the American taxpayer is, the American people are even more generous. You look anywhere in the world when an earthquake hits or a tsunami or any kind of suffering, no people rally quicker as private citizens to raise money and donate to those causes. We don't always get paid back immediately in terms of gratitude. The fact is, there are a lot of these countries around the world where we're making a difference in the real lives of real people, and yet there are not going to be any pro-American marches down the street next week. And yet it speaks to our character as a nation and as a people. And as long as we never lose that, I think we're going to be fine. We just have some work to do ahead of us. And that's what we're going to be trying to be a part of here. So I would just encourage you to keep your eye on these issues because they're important, but they're solvable. And if we solve them, then our children and grandchildren will be part of the most prosperous and most secure generation of Americans that has ever lived. As hard as that may be to believe today, standing where we are, I don't mean where we are, I mean where we are in terms of our history, it's imminently doable. We just have to go do it. And I hope, God willing, that I'll have a chance to be a part of that. So, thank you for the opportunity to speak. We're working on different ideas about how to help it. For example, one of the struggles that we're going through now is, a lot of these servicemen and women pick up great skills, technical skills. Great example is these truckers. These guys are hauling massive explosives, but yet they're struggling to be certified as truckers in their home states when they come back. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think if you can truck, massive explosives and ordinances in the truck, you're probably okay to be hauling lettuce. And yet, in some states, it's become a struggle to get that done. So, but ultimately, that's, we've got to get the economy growing again, or there won't be jobs for these folks. The other element of that, of course, is, and the good news is, that people today are surviving war injuries that were just not surviving. You just didn't see them before. I've met, some really special people that, for example, I met a special services guy, Green Beret, who had lost both of his legs, and a year and a half later was back in the field. Not as like a guy behind a desk, like as a special services, like kicking down doors and going in with dogs to spot landmines and clear them. But this is a very functional person now, again, even despite the injuries they've suffered. So those are real challenges as well in terms of getting those folks integrated into the economy despite that. So we've got some real challenges. That's a blessing that they're surviving those injuries. But the challenge is now how to integrate them into American society and America's economy. So there's a real challenge there as well. I appreciate your kind words. Honestly, though, my job is pretty easy compared to the people that are actually making a difference. The people I really, and I'm honored by you saying that, the people I've always admired and continue to admire are the people that get up at 4:30 in the morning, 7 days a week, to fight to keep their business alive. To me, that's really special. I get up at 4:30 too, but it's usually to go to the gym, but and sometimes to go to work. But anyway, my point is that those are the everyday people that are making a tremendous difference in the lives of everyday people. And so I appreciate your kind words. So I don't necessarily think that Washington is divided because the country is divided on these policies. This race, no matter what, look, now I'm going to put like my political scientist hat on for a second, but no matter what, usually in these conventions, like one candidate will finish and they'll get like a 7-point lead, and then the other person will do their convention, the bounce goes the other way. There may not be a bounce in these conventions. Why is that? The answer is because people are pretty much nailed in on 48% are going to vote for Mitt Romney no matter what happens, 48% are going to vote for Barack Obama no matter what happens, and there's 4 or 5% of people that are still kind of in play if they even vote at all. That reflects the country's having a debate about what the role of government should be and about what government should be doing and should not be doing and how we can make things better. It's a real societal debate. It's not new to us, by the way. It's happened before. So really what these elections should be about is not a choice of personalities, but a choice about different views of what government's role should be. And I think the only answer to that is leadership. What you need is folks in government that stand up and say is, look, I know you don't agree with me, you don't agree with everything I say, but here's the problems that we face. Here's what I think would be the best thing for us to do. And convince people to follow you in that endeavor. And we've had that in the past. It's not about unanimity, but it certainly is about creating consensus behind ideas to lead our country one way or the other. And right now, no one's done that yet. And that's when no one's risen to the task, whether it's an individual or even one of the parties, of convincing the American. Public opinion is what people believe when you first ask them a question. Public judgment is what they come to believe once their leaders have taken the time to explain to them the choices, the consequences, and which direction they recommend, and they're able to convince people to go in that direction with them. And that's what we're still waiting for. And Washington will continue to be divided until we make a decision about what role we want government to play in our country. And what's one of the reasons I wanted to serve in the Senate is to help arrive at that point. Well, first of all, online electronic PE is probably is a lot of fun, but it's probably not very productive. But a couple things I'd say to you. First of all, I've always, as a federal policy maker, I'm always worried. One of the reasons I'm historically worried about raising education as an issue at the federal level is because this is what usually it'll mean. It'll mean, okay, here's a bunch of money for you, state of Florida, but you have to do it the way we tell you to do it. And that's problematic for me, because I think every state is different, and quite frankly, I think every community is different. And how you would structure a program in South Miami-Dade may look very different than the way you might construct it in West Miami-Dade even. Imagine now Washington telling the rest of the country, here's a pot of money for education, but you must spend it the way we tell you to. Even worse, here's a bunch of things you have to do on education, but figure out how to pay for it. That happens too. So I'm always wary about the role the federal government can play on education. I always think the closer the education is to the people who are receiving the benefits of it, the better structured it will be for a community. The second point I would say to you about just the funding of it is that it's going to be a continuing challenge, because funding for just in the state, I'm not a state policymaker anymore, but I can just tell you that Medicaid as a program has now grown to become the largest piece of our state budget. And that's not going to change anytime in the near future. So that's going to place a real challenge on our ability to find new sources of funding. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look for it. And economic growth is one of the best things you can do to create more revenue for government so that it can pay for the things government should be involved in doing. But the other thing we're going to have to be better at doing is delivering the services at a greater efficiency. And that's where I think online courses could be useful. But look, it's not a silver bullet. I mean, it's part of the solution. It's not the solution. There are a lot of other ideas that we can think of. I mean, we've innovated everything else. Certainly delivery of education is something we can innovate on as well, and provide services for people in a way that they can best receive it. But we have to prioritize it. And I think as much as we talk about education, we still talk about education in this country as a concept as opposed to a reality. It is literally, as hard as it is to sometimes communicate to this, decisions that what kids are doing when they're 12 years old is going to deeply impact what they're doing when they're 42 years old. And it's hard sometimes to think in those terms. But that's the reality of the 21st century. It really, in many ways, kids are determining their future at a time when they're not even thinking about it because they're 12 years old. And yet, we know that, for example, if a kid falls behind by 3rd grade, it just becomes so much harder for them to catch up. And then not every kid's coming from the same place. The reality is some kids are growing up in stable 2-parent homes in safe neighborhoods. Some kids are being raised by their grandmother because they never knew their father, and their mom has to work 2 jobs. And they're living in a dangerous neighborhood with substandard housing and no access to health care. That's a lot of stuff to overcome. And those kids are going to it's going to require more activity in their lives in order to get them to educational parity with the kids that are coming from a different background. These are realities that have to be reflected in our policy making too. And it's not easy to do. Other countries just don't try. That's one of the points I was trying to make. Other countries just don't try. They say, well, then you're not going to make it. We want everybody, no matter what you were born into, to have the same chance. But in order for everyone, no matter where you come from, to have the same chance, means, you know, some kids are going to require more attention in that regard. And we just have to have our policies reflected. Last night, President Clinton said in his speech something about, you know, he still came from a place where 2 + 2 = 4. It was about arithmetic. So this is about arithmetic too. Look, the money that was spent on the war efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan in the last decade and beyond is not insignificant. But the real debt problem America faces is the long-term structural debt. It's not just the money we owe today, it's the money we are going to owe, and the interest on the money that we owe. And the debt is just, the wars are not the cause of that, especially in the long term. The cause, and foreign aid is not the cause of that. I know people love to talk about foreign aid is less than 1% of our national budget. And I know I've met people that think it's 25%. It's less than 1% of our national budget. Foreign aid is not the cause of our national debt. I'm not for wasting money on anything, but food stamps are not the cause of debt. Discretionary spending is not the cause of our national debt. We have a national debt in the country for one very simple reason. We have a series of very good and very important government programs that are structured in a way that are not sustainable. One example is Medicare, a program that my mom is under. My mom is 82 years old. She depends on Medicare for all of her medical needs. I think Medicare is crucial and essential and it needs to be maintained for her generation, and I want it to exist for mine. But the way Medicare is set up right now, it goes bankrupt. That's not because I want it to, that's not an ideological talking point, that is a mathematical reality. It spends a lot more money than it takes in, and it will only get worse. And here's why. Because healthcare costs more money than it ever has and continues to rise. More people are retiring than ever, baby boom generation. They will live longer than people have ever lived. So just do the math. More people retire than are working. You have less workers and more retirees. They're going to live a lot longer than people have ever lived. All this is good news, by the way. And the healthcare is costing more because it's getting better in terms of quality, in terms of the diagnostics and the medicines. But it creates a math problem for us. That's the structural problem in the entitlement programs, particularly in Medicare. That is the singular cause of the long-term national debt that we're facing. There are other causes, but it's the biggest one. So we have to solve that. And here's the good news. The sooner we act, the sooner we do something about it. It doesn't have to be Paul Ryan's plan, although it's the only serious one that's been offered so far. If someone has another one, they should offer it. But the sooner we act to save Medicare, it's never going to be easy to do it, but the easier it will be to do it. And here's the simple solution. I mean, not the simple solution. Here's the simple truth about it. We cannot save Medicare unless people in my generation are willing to accept that our Medicare is going to look different than our parents. Now, we can save Medicare if we act right now. We can keep Medicare exactly the way it is for people that are on it today or about to retire, 55 years of age or older. But that will require 41-year-olds like me to accept that our Medicare is going to be different. I may have to work until I'm 65 and a half instead of 65. My benefit might be delivered differently. But I'm willing to do that. As far as taxes are concerned, listen to what I'm about to say, because this is absolutely the truth. There is no tax increase that we can pass that will pay off the national debt. There is none. If you tax the richest people in America at 100%, which you can't do because you can't tax anything at 100%, it doesn't even come close to paying the debt. There is only one solution. This is not a philosophical and ideological fight. You just can't, it doesn't add up, the money's not there. You're talking about trillions of dollars in debt, 16 trillion. And so the only solution to the debt is economic growth. You've got to grow your economy. It has to, because that's where debt matters. Think of the economy as a pie, and think of the debt as a slice of that pie. If you can hold the slice of pie the same size, and you can grow the pie, the debt becomes smaller and less of a problem. And that's what we have to do. We've got to have fiscal spending discipline because look, in the 2000 era, with all the people talking about the Bush tax cuts that passed in 2001 and 2003, do you know that the government, even after those tax cuts, received record revenue? Record revenue. More money came in for the federal government even after the tax cuts than it had ever received. But guess what else broke records? Record spending. In essence, even though the government took in more money than it ever received, it spent even more than it received. It grew even faster than the revenue was growing. So you've got to have some fiscal discipline on the growth of spending, largely driven by these programs that are not discretionary. You have to spend the money. People are entitled to it because they've paid into it. They've paid into Medicare and Social Security, and they expect that benefit will be there when they retire. That's the only solution, fiscal discipline and economic growth. You can't tax your way and you cannot cut your way out of this debt. You just can't. There's not enough cuts. If you zeroed out discretionary spending, it doesn't pay off the debt either. It's only 30-something% of our budget. If we don't do anything, there won't be a Medicare. It'll be bankrupt, and so will the country. So the solution is, what will Medicare look like? And here's what I hope it will look like. I hope it will look the same for people that are 55 years of age or older. And this is not a political talking point. Here's why. If you've worked your whole life depending on something that's going to look a certain way, you can't come to someone at 59 and say, guess what? It's going to look different. Because you don't have time to plan for that. For me, Medicare is going to be a very different thing. Now, I can't tell you, there are a lot of different ways to approach it. But for me, Medicare is probably going to be, I'll have to work a little longer, maybe a few months, maybe a year longer than I had planned to. I was probably going to end up doing that anyway. One of the advantages of living longer and being healthier is the ability to be productive into later years. Second, the way I deliver my health care is probably going to be capitated and age-adjusted and need-based as well. So, if I retire with millions of dollars in stocks and bonds, I'm probably going to have to pay more for my Medicare than someone who doesn't retire with that kind of money. That you don't have that as much today in Medicare, so it may look more like that. Hopefully you'll have more choices. A Medicare Advantage is not perfect, but one of the things that it does have is choice and competition for patients' business. Healthcare, I think it'll be a lot more consumer-driven for my generation. I don't think you can ask that of people that are 81 years old, but I think you can certainly ask that of people that are 39 years old or 41 years old, because I've got 25 or 30 years to plan for that. So, by the way, those concepts I think are true for healthcare as a whole. There's no magic bullet there either, but I wish people had more choices on health insurance. For example, I wish I could buy health insurance from any company in America that will sell it to me. Why can't I buy health insurance from any company in America that will sell me a health insurance policy? Why, if I buy my own health care, do I have to pay taxes on the money that I use to buy my health care? But if my employer buys my health care, they don't have to spend the money to pay taxes on the money they buy my health insurance for me. If you created a vibrant private market where individuals had more control over their health care dollars, you'd have some people meet the need. Now, not all of it's going to be solved by the free market, obviously. Health insurance is a complicated issue. And the chronically ill are probably never going to find a vibrant private market. The government's always going to have to probably provide some role to play in high-risk pools. For people that are chronically ill, who are guaranteed to get sick, you're not going to have a vibrant private market. Insurance companies are not going to fight over the right to insure someone who's chronically ill, because that's not how the market's going to work. So for those folks, you probably will have to figure out some sort of a high-risk pool. But for healthy Americans, I wish we had more choice over how we spend our dollars. Right now, the only choice most of us have is they give you a book and they say, pick your doctor. But I can't pick between insurance companies. Your boss tells you who your insurance company is. And if your boss says, here's the money, go out and buy insurance for yourself, you have to pay taxes on that money as if it was salary. So these are the kinds of changes that I think we'll be able to pursue. None of them are silver bullets. It's complicated. But the one thing I hope we'll never do is destroy the quality of American health care. The one thing I hope we'll never do is destroy how good the people are that are treating you, how good the diagnostics are, how good the medicines are. I mean, anyone here in healthcare will tell you that open heart surgeries have dramatically decreased because of advances, not just in diagnostics, but in less invasive procedures that have better outcomes at a lower cost. These are the kinds of results I hope we'll be able to find. Thank you guys for having me.